Hi guys, my name is Abby and welcome back to my new video. So for as long as I can remember, I've pretty much been a miniskirt girl. I love a good miniskirt. I think they're so darling. But definitely now, as I get older, sometimes I do wish I had a bit of a longer skirt, like not like floor length, but maybe a little like to the knee or like mid-calf. I think those are super darling and they look beautiful, but I don't really have a lot of skirts like that, and I feel like when I go out to the store, as usual, I'm never pleased with what I see, and it just makes more sense to make something that I like, so that way I know it's good quality, it's made well, and of course it's gonna fit me perfectly. So I thought, why not make a couple of skirts coming up, and I'm so excited. I want to try to look through my fabric stash and not buy any new fabric because I have a lot of fabric, and now that I'm home again and not going back to school, it's really hit me how much of this room is fabric. And it's not a big room, and I should really try to do something with it instead of continuing to buy more. So let's look through my fabric stash and see if there are any goodies that'll make a beautiful skirt. Also, look how cute, look! It's a little Miffy hair clip. For any Miffy lovers out there, I think it's so darling. I don't know how to do my hair, so let's just pretend it looks cute. Oh my gosh!
For my first skirt, I wanted it to be more of a drop waist skirt, and I found this beautiful floral fabric in my stash that would work perfectly. So I began with first cutting out the waist piece. I made it shaped like a trapezoid, with it being smaller towards my waist and flaring out towards my hips. By cutting it on the fold, the pieces will be symmetrical when opened up, so I did this for the front pieces. Since the fabric was light and see-through, I used a lightweight cotton to further help make it thicker and just give it more structure. So I cut out 2 pieces each of the flower fabric and one of the cotton to have 3 layers altogether for the waist. For the back of the waist piece, I wanted to add in some darts to help it fit better, so I made sure to add those into my measurements while cutting out the pieces, while fighting off goose who wanted to eat my tape measure. I pinned down the darts for all 3 layers and then sewed them down. Then I connected the front waist pieces to the back waist pieces. I wanted the zipper to be on the side of the skirt instead of on the back as I usually do, so I had to make sure that I was connecting the same sides for all 3 layers together and it would not affect the zipper. Once I had all the darts and the 3 waist pieces sewn, I decided to take a break on that and work on the body of the skirt. I cut out 2 long rectangles of my flower fabric and of my cotton fabric. I made sure that they were wide enough because I wanted to gather them along the waist to kind of help them flare out. And like the waist pieces, I pinned down the sides and then I sewed them to make them one long rectangle. Once they were all sewed, I serged down the seam allowance and the side raw edges of both skirts for the zipper. Taking my hand sewing needle, I did a quick running stitch along the top edges of both of my skirts separately to gather them. You can use your machine for this by sewing along the top with the longest stitch length possible and then just slightly pulling on the threads, but I just prefer to do it by hand. Once both of my skirts were gathered, it was time to take back out my waist pieces and begin putting them all together. Now, it was definitely a bit of a hassle since we are sewing 5 layers of fabric together. First, I laid down the waist piece that I wanted to be the one visible when worn. I laid that down right side up, and then laid the cotton waist on top of it with the wrong side to that right side. Then, taking my flower skirt, I put it on top of the cotton waist, right sides together, matching up the side seams and evenly spacing out the gathers. Then, taking the cotton lining skirt, I put that on top of the flower skirt, wrong sides together, matching up the side seams and evenly spacing out the gathers. And then lastly, I put the lining waist piece on top, right sides together. And I used a lot of pins to secure it, and then I sewed all the layers together. With the skirt now being one piece, I folded in the raw edges of the waist pieces to prepare for my zipper. I'm leaving the top edge alone because I ended up using a bias tape to finish it off. With my zipper, I inserted it between the layers of the waist and along the sides of the skirts. Beneath the zipper, I pinned the skirts together separately and made sure to first sew this together before sewing in my zipper. I did decide that my waist piece was a little longer than I would have liked after trying it on, so I did cut some of that off. Then, using a white bias tape, I pinned it along the top edge of my waist, making sure to fold in the side raw edges of the bias tape. After sewing that down, I used the same bias tape to finish off the bottom raw edge of the flower skirt to kind of help tie in the top and bottom. To make it more fluid and less bulky, I pinned down the bias tape, and then when it got to the point where the two ends should connect, I folded open the bias tape and sewed them together, and then folded them back up and pinned them down to the hem, and this helped it lay down much flatter. Then, with the cotton lining skirt, I did a regular rolled hem to tuck away that raw edge. And for some added decoration, I used this pink satin ribbon to add some bows along the hips. After cutting out the ribbon to my desired length, I used the flame from my candle to melt down the edges to help prevent the ribbon from fraying. And then, using my hand sewing needle, I sewed the ribbons down, making sure that they were symmetrical from one another. And then my first skirt was complete. Now, I had every intention to make the skirt long, but I found this really pretty plaid fabric in my stash, so I decided just to make a mini pleated skirt. But you can very easily make this longer by just making the length of your skirt longer. First, I cut out a long rectangle that was my desired length for my skirt. Then, using my tape measure, I measured out every 1.5 inch increment from the side. I like to make the pleats this wide because I think this is when they look the best, but you can always increase or decrease the width of the pleats according to how pleated you want your skirt to be. Smaller pleats would make it pleat out more as compared to larger pleats, and I think this pleat size is like a good happy medium. Once I had my fabric marked, I moved the second increment to the first one and pinned it down. Then I moved the fourth increment over to the third one and pinned that down. And I continued this pattern until the pleated fabric measured the front of my body. I personally like my pleated skirts to have the pleats sewn down, so I measured down 5 inches from each pleat and pinned them down, moving the pleat slightly over as I get closer to my hips to help give me more room and not make it so tight. I like to have my zipper in the back of my skirts rather than on the side, so I repeated this process of cutting a rectangle of my desired length and pleating it, but instead of one rectangle the width of my back, I made it 2 rectangles, each the half of my back, so when joined together they would make the complete back, but with the separation in the middle being so I can add in my zipper. I connected both skirt back panels to either side of the skirt front panel, while once again fighting off Goose, who just might win the award for being the most stressful sewing assistant ever. Once those side seams were sewn, I made sure to serger down the seam allowance and also the side raw edges of the skirt for when I attached the zipper, and once all that was done, I began sewing down each pleat. To make the waistband, I used the fold of the fabric to cut out half of my waist measurement, which would open up to be my full waist measurement after cutting, and made sure that the width of the waistband was wide enough to be folded into fourths. Folding it into fourths helps give the waistband more structure, since I don't really like to use interfacing, which a lot of people use for their waistbands. Taking out my iron, I ironed the waistband in half to create a guide, and then folded in each side to that middle part guide, to then fold the fabric back over, tucking the raw edge inside. Taking back out my skirt, I sandwiched the pleats in between the waistband and pinned it down. I folded in the side raw edges of the waistband to match with the side edges of the skirt. But before sewing down the waistband, I would first sew in the zipper. I inserted the zipper between the waistband and pinned it down along the side of the skirt. I only had this super long zipper, so I just pinned it down to my desired length, and I matched up the back of the skirt underneath the zipper and made sure to sew that together first before sewing down my zipper. I made sure to secure the bottom of the zipper while I sewed it, so I cut off the excess zipper at the bottom to avoid bulk. Once the zipper was complete, I sewed down the waistband, and then I also did a quick rolled hem along the bottom of the skirt to tuck in that raw edge, and then the pleated skirt was all complete. Now this next skirt is probably my favorite, and I dyed my hair red, and I think it looks so great with my red hair. To begin, I started with my cotton lining layer, and I cut out a trapezoid-like shape on the fold of my fabric. I wanted the skirt to be slightly gathered and flare out at the bottom, so after cutting it on the fold, this will be the front of my skirt. For the back, I repeated cutting out the piece on the fold, but then I cut the fold open to have two separate pieces, so that way I would have a seam for my zipper. I cut out these pieces on both my strawberry fabric and my cotton lining fabric. Taking my two back pieces, I pinned them to either side of my skirt front and sewed them down, doing this for both the strawberry and lining skirts. Once connected, I serged down the seam allowance and side raw edges for my zipper. Moving on to my waistband, I did the same as I did with my pleated skirt, with cutting out a rectangle that was the circumference of my waist and wide enough to be folded into fourths. And then I used my iron again to fold it properly to have the raw edges tucked inside and to be crisp and flat. Taking back out my hand sewing needle, I did a running stitch to gather the top edges of both the strawberry and cotton skirts separately, and then inserted them into the waistband, making sure to evenly space out the gathers. On the waistband, I marked where the side seams should be, and I matched up those skirt side seams to those points to help make sure that the gathers were evenly spaced out. Just as before, I wanted to sew the zipper down before the waistband, so I inserted the zipper between the waistband and skirt pieces to try to help conceal it. I then connected the bottom edge of both skirts below the zipper, and I made sure to sew those up first separately before sewing the zipper down. With the zipper now secure, I sewed down the waistband and did a rolled hem on both the strawberry and cotton lining skirts to finish them up. Now for this next part, it might have been easier to sew these down first before completing the entire skirt, but I was worried about how many ribbons I wanted on the final skirt, so I really wanted it to be complete before I made that decision. Using my tape measure, I measured down 5 inches from the waist and pinned down the red ribbon. I made sure to light the ends to prevent fraying, and I wanted 4 lines of the ribbon, so I made each line 5 inches away from the previous one. When sewing, I sewed down both the left and right sides of the ribbon to secure it down to the skirt. I made sure to only sew them down to the strawberry skirt and not the cotton lining skirt. Once they were all sewn, I cut out a bunch of strips of the ribbon to tie into bows, once again making sure to use my candle to melt the edges to prevent fraying. I then used my hand sewing needle to attach them to various places along all 4 of the lines, and then the third and final skirt was complete.